Hey everybody, thanks for joining yet another episode of Radio KBE. As always, if you can like and subscribe, it helps the channel out. I appreciate you guys if you do it, and you already know the spiel. Outside of that, you guys have been amazing supporting the channel and just commenting and whatnot, so I appreciate you guys greatly. So on this episode, I wanted to talk about just the media scrum, like the sort of the media circuit that Darvin Ham has been sort of going through and doing in since his press conference, since he's been introduced as the Lakers' new head coach. And one of the things I wanted to talk about was just like the way that he's been talking about just the team and how he wants to play basketball, and just the optimism that I just want to talk about. I'm genuinely an optimistic person, and one of the things that I always try to do is, like, I'm never the type of guy to just be like, I try to be realistic, but I never want to be somebody who's not who won't give a team a chance or won't give a player a chance. I like to think that a lot of times I try to see the glass half full, and the way I always like to think of things is, if something's working, then that's great, something's working. But if something's not working, then that's just an area of improvement. And obviously for certain things, there's just no way to improve it. And there's ample historical evidence that certain things can't be improved, or that it's just in the nature of a player or nature of a coach or something like that. But I always try to give a chance. And I think that the general consensus, or like the general sort of, lack of enthusiasm around this Laker team this season. Obviously we're in the middle of June, so there's still a lot of stuff that has to essentially be solidified. Like, we don't even know who all of our assistant coaches are. We don't know. We've got like pretty much more or less seven to 10 wide open roster spots. We don't even know like what this team is going to look like. And so there's not much to go on, but I always think that one of the things that's really important, that's important for us to consider, is the general attitude that the coach has about how things go and just kind of how things should work. So I've been watching all the interviews that Darvin Ham has been doing. So he's done one. Obviously, he's done the introductory press conference. He's done the podcast with the folks at Spectrum. He's done the interview with Dan Patrick, which is interesting as well. But the one that I thought was the one that I kind of took some notes on, that I wanted to kind of discuss on today's video, was from his interview with Rich Eisen. And it's about a 22-minute video. And the first, I would say, I don't know, maybe 8 to 11 minutes, are about Kobe stories and just Coach Ham's personal life and his personal journey and stuff like that. And then after that, he sort of starts talking, answering questions and stuff like that about, he starts, just talking to him about how stuff related to the Lakers. But before I get into that, there's one quality about Darvin Ham that I really want to sort of discuss, or just kind of bring up, because it matters to me a lot. And it's something, that I've always thought is important, not just for somebody in a leadership role, but somebody who's just like, as a coach, but just somebody who's in a leadership role in general. And one of the things that I think I've been a big vocal proponent of is like, you can't disrespect the basketball gods. And when I say that, and I always like to say this thing, like, the basketball gods are always watching. And like, one of the things that I think has always been like very, that happens a lot when you're a superstar, is you start ignoring the little things, the small things that matter, that make basketball what it is. Scrapping for rebounds and boxing out, navigating screens, fighting through screens, not giving up switches early, pressuring the ball full court, stuff like that. A lot of times there are things that happen because the coach tells you to do it, and then there's stuff that comes internally. It's just like, it's within the player to do it and not to do it. And one of the things that I think the basketball gods always respect is that when you do the little things, the gods always, the basketball gods always reward you. And the thing that I really like about Darvin Ham is his background is being a guy who had to be like a blue collar player. He had to do all the dirty stuff, the stuff that stars don't want to do for him to be successful, for him to be an impactful player, for him to be able to even make generational money for himself and have a long career as a player before eventually transitioning onto the next phase of his life, which was assistant coaching and stuff like that. And I think people, from a personal level, I think people who have to approach life in that manner and have to approach even their careers and their professions in that manner, they have a greater respect for the small things when it comes to coaching or being successful on the basketball court. And I'm not saying that Frank Vogel didn't do that, but that matters so much. And I think when you have a guy like that talking to your star players, even outside of just your role players, talking to your star players who themselves, guys like Russ, guys like LeBron, guys like Anthony Davis, who have gotten by for so long on just their natural talents and abilities. I don't expect Darvin Ham to turn around and expect, have LeBron boxing out on every possession or Anthony Davis, doing all that sort of stuff. But I think when you have a coach that can talk to the star players and explain the importance of maybe every now and then putting in that kind of effort, I think that trickles down to the role players. And the role players know that, hey, if I miss an assignment, my star player teammate is going to be there to back me up. And there won't be any like, hey, you didn't do your job. And so as we go into the interview, we'll cover some of that stuff. But I took notes from this Rich Eisen interview because there was just so much good stuff that came out of it. And the way Darvin Ham responds to the questions, the things that he emphasizes, I think it's really important. And, Coach Ham has said many times that he's a straight shooter. And if you listen to his interviews and the way he responds, he doesn't sort of mince his words. And he doesn't sort of, try to make you read between the lines. I think he's very deliberate and very specific and very purposeful with the things that he responds with. So let's go ahead and jump into it. So he does this interview with Rich Eisen and it's really good. It's he talks about Kobe, he talks about his personal career, and then Rich starts asking him questions about just going into his philosophy and stuff like that. So the first thing Rich asks him is like, what is like the first thing? What are the core things that you're going to do that's going to matter? What about offense? What about defense? Making everything work. And so Coach Ham says something that's I think is really good. The first thing he says, or in his response, one of the things he says is, offense and defense there's two different ways of looking at it, right? Like they're connected. You've heard him say that both things are connected. The way you play defense, how it fuels your offense, and vice versa. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting that he says in this interview is that he says that offense is subjective. He says when you watch and evaluate offense, it's based on what the opposing team is trying to force you to do or how you're imposing your will and stuff like that. He says offense is subjective. But he says defense is objective, meaning that there's no opinions about defense. You're either playing defense or you're not. And he breaks it down. He says transition defense, half-court defense, pick and roll defense, point of attack defense. And like I thought it was so great that he talked about each one of these as if they're different categories, different compartments, because I think that matters. And I think when you look at the way the Lakers played defense the year that they won the championship and the way they played defense the way they played recently this past season, there is a very clear difference with what tenacity they played their defense with. And I just love the fact that he said defense is objective. Like, he's right. If you watch defensive tape, you know where the points of failure are on defense. There's no confusion about that. If there's a player that loses containment, if it's an all-switch scheme and a player loses containment against his isolation assignment, like there's no confusion as to what happened on that play, where the defensive breakdown was. That doesn't mean you admonish the player. It just means you got to be better, right? There's nothing to lie about. There's nothing to hide when it comes to that. Same thing, to some degree, offense is objective. When you get wide open threes and you don't make them, you just got to make them. It's a make or miss league. That's obviously what it is. But on the opposite side, there are teams that will try to force you to take the shot that you don't want to take or do something that you don't want to do and stuff like that. So I thought it was very cool that he said it in that manner. That offense is subjective and defense is objective, and I think that will go a long way towards, that combined with his straightforwardness. I think that'll go a long way towards cleaning up some of the stuff that may have been happening in those film sessions. Instead of it being trying to blame people and stuff like that, it's more like, hey, let's just look at the tape together and see what's happening, right? Because the approach is different. The approach is not the same. The whole approach changes from, hey, why did you not do this? Or why didn't you try hard enough to do this? To, okay, look, if this is what happens, then this either needs to happen, or if this is what happens, then it affects everybody in this way. And it's not pointing a blame at the player, it's taking a look at the scheme. So again, you're already hearing, I'm already optimistic as to how those conversations may go to some degree. And Ham said, Coach Ham specifically said that the big focus is going to be on defense. It's going to be about cleaning up transition defense, cleaning up your half-court defense, and all your pick and roll coverages and stuff like that. And if you've watched the Bucks, if you've watched the Hawks under Mike Budenholzer, there's a lot of interesting stuff that they used to do. They like to run that semi-drop coverage. The Lakers, like I said, I don't know what the personnel is going to be. Is Anthony Davis going to be the 4? Is it going to be the 5? It'll be interesting to see just kind of what direction the Lakers go in. But the next thing that he sort of talked about is how to deploy this sort of stuff amongst the team and stuff like that, and how what he plans on accomplishing, by playing a certain style of offense and playing a certain style of defense. And I think one of the phrases that he continues to, I keep hearing him use over and over again, is Coach Ham has specifically said he's emphasizing sharing the load, the workload between on both the offensive end and the defensive end. And in this interview was the first time I heard him say that if you share the workload, it helps also protect the bodies of the players. And he made this reference specifically in reference to a guy like Anthony Davis, a guy like Russ, a guy like LeBron. That this idea that if you share the workload defensively and offensively, if it's not something that's like, hey, you have, Anthony Davis, you have to cover for all 4 of these guys when there's a defensive breakdown, emphasizing that if everybody does their job, now Anthony Davis doesn't have to stress out physically on the defensive end and then have nothing there on the offensive end. This was a huge, the reason why I'm very optimistic about that is because this was a huge problem. It was a huge deal last season. Whenever Anthony Davis, when LeBron went out and all the hubbub and stuff like that was, LeBron's out, Anthony Davis has got to play the 5. Everybody was saying that the whole reason why Anthony Davis has to play the 5 is because Russ is a non-shooter, right? He's not a very good shooter, so you play Anthony Davis 5 and you spread it out. But the problem that happened with that situation is that the Lakers were getting obliterated on the defense. Not obliterated, that's too extreme, but AD's offensive game suffered a little bit because of him playing the 5. Because teams would go out of their way to, and not just teams, but because there was so much breakage with the containment on the perimeter and stuff like that, he'd have to constantly help. He would get in foul trouble, stuff like that. And what ended up happening is he'd physically get exhausted from the amount of defense that he had to cover for, going from his guy on the perimeter and running over and trying to defend at the rim, protect the shots and stuff like that, or protect the rim. And then he'd be tired. So what would happen is that he would be exhausted from having to cover for guys on the defensive end, and then on the offensive end, we would yell at him, right? Even I was upset, sometimes that AD was being very passive or being very nonchalant with his offense. And I got a lot of pushback last season from folks on, fans in the fan base, he's averaging 25 and 10, and how can you say that he's not doing that? AD is so talented that he can just run up and down the floor for 35 minutes with no plays called for him and average 20 and 10. Easy. That's how talented he is. But the impact that the impact that we want out of him as a player, dominating on the defensive end, scaring teams from even attempting layups, or just, pounding the glass and stuff like that on the offensive end, or in the paint and getting easy shots for himself and stuff like that. Those sort of things, there's a markable impact from those things, from that specific situation, that makes it different. A 25-10 where he's playing casually and a 25-10 when he's dominating. Like, if you watch basketball, you know what the difference is between that, right? Like, you understand the impact of that and of when AD's locked in and when AD's just kind of going through the motions. And I think this concept of sharing the workload, emphasizing to the stars, which I would imagine will eventually pass down to the role players once we have them, like sharing the workload and that helping protect each other, protect their bodies in the regular season so they don't have to exhaust themselves. That's a big deal. I think that matters a lot because staying healthy has been the biggest question for Anthony Davis. It's been the biggest question for LeBron James. And it's not to say that it wasn't an emphasis before, but it's even more of an emphasis now because we are on LeBron's timeline and we want to try and maximize both of their healths so that we can, make it into the postseason and potentially make some noise. So I think that idea of how sharing the workload bleeds into, connects with like protecting their bodies and keeping them fresh for the regular season, I think that's a big deal. And I think this concept of sharing the workload is also going to be, I'm hoping, becomes sort of like a point of emphasis when it comes to our roster construction. Like, we don't want guys that are bad in their specific roles. And they can't just be specific roles, right? Like, you can't just be a shooter. You got to be able to compete on the defensive end too as well. And so, like, that buy-in, having guys that are willing to do that sort of stuff, guys like Wendy Gabriel, guys like Austin Reeves, guys like Stanley Johnson, who are willing to compete on both ends, I think that matters a lot. I think it's a great answer. And just, thinking about it conceptually is really great. And that gives me a big boost in optimism in regards to his philosophy and stuff like that. And so as we continue forward, like as he's continuing with the interview, they start asking specific questions in regards to, him having conversations with LeBron, him having conversations with Anthony Davis, him having conversations with Russ. And so I just picked specific things out of those interviews that I thought were worth just kind of mentioning. So when Rich Eisen asked Darvin Ham about speaking with LeBron, like he just he doesn't get into very much detail, but he very specifically says that he sent a very long text to Bron and he talked to him about just what the defensive strategy is going to be, what the what his philosophy is going to be and stuff like that. And it sounds like he says that LeBron's response was like very positive. Obviously, we know LeBron's already tweeted about how excited he is since Darvin Ham has been hired. He's tweeted about it. But again, just that level of engagement, like LeBron is a very cerebral guy. And for him to ask Ham these questions so early on in the season, and then for Ham to answer them and to, LeBron to respond positively the way that he did, I think that's a great sign. Again, that gives a lot of, that's our star leader. It gives us a lot of, having his buy-in and having him committed to that philosophy is always something that's really good for the team. And then the next thing that he talked about was Anthony Davis and having dinner with Anthony Davis. And in that interview, I thought he kind of casually talks about it, but and he just kind of mentions it in passing. But I thought it was really good. He mentions that during the dinner, and I believe he said he had like a 3-hour dinner with Anthony Davis. He mentions that they watched film, which I thought was funny because it's like you're having dinner. Like, why would you watch film during dinner? But again, it's just emphasis on the small things, like just kind of taking those moments and opportunities. Like, you think about having dinner with friends and stuff like that. Like, it's very casual. It's a very, I don't want to use the word vulnerable, but it's like, it's a very like your guard is down, right? Like you wouldn't think that you would talk about film or cover film and stuff like that, but it's just when you trust somebody, like you're always willing to sit down and eat with somebody that you trust, that you enjoy the time with that person. And the fact that Coach Ham is able to, I'm assuming, pull out an iPad or something like that, or pull out a laptop and just go over some tape with Anthony Davis, like, I think that's a big deal. I think that matters. And I think that helps build rapport and trust. And it's not uncommon for coaches to have individual dinners with star players, but it's just, again, the approach is different. And you never know how buy-in can be reciprocated differently when there's a different approach. And then eventually we get to the big question, right? Obviously, we don't know if Russ is going to be on this roster or not by training camp, but it's looking like he may be on this roster by training camp. And so he gets asked, just about, like, how are you going to handle Russ, and, what are the expectations with him and stuff like that. And so, again, every answer that Ham gives is always interesting. He says that he went and had a dinner with Russ, and they discussed things. And Rich Eisen specifically talks about like Russ's energy and just kind of his personality and the way that he likes to play. And I think Ham responds to Rich and says, we're not looking to harness him back. We're not looking to hold Russ back, is what Darvin Ham says. So when I heard that, I was just like, all right, what does this mean? Like, because I would imagine that's a point of contention. Like, sometimes Russ plays too fast. I've always said that Russ, when things get too tight, like when the game gets real pressure cookery, like it seems like Russ's response is to play faster, play harder. And, that's often led to bad stuff, turnovers, really bad shots, stuff like that. And that's an internal thing that happens. I think it's a human thing that happens with a lot of players. And he's not the only one. There's tons of players who have the same issue when things get real tight in the game. But Ham goes further. He says, we're not looking to harness Russ. We're not looking to tone him down. Instead, what we want to do is redirect that energy in the right direction. And I think that's really good, because that's acknowledging a quality that Russ has that I personally think is a rare quality. Like, Russ has a motor that is like, you have to learn to have that and to constantly keep it going. And I think Russ's motor, I've said this like before, that like Russ's motor is generational. Like, there are very few players. LeBron's another example of a guy with a generational motor. There are few players where, regardless of exhaustion, regardless of how they're playing, they play with a level of consistent speed and ferocity that constantly puts defenses on pressure. Russ's biggest knock is he can't shoot. And, now he's had some struggles finishing and stuff like that in the guard. But it's never been for a lack of ferocity or a lack of motor. And you see that with Giannis. Like, Giannis is another great example of a guy where he may miss 2 or 3 shots in a row, but he's going to go to the rim. You are going to feel Giannis, or you're going to have to defend Giannis like every single play when he has the ball in his hands and he wants to get to the rim. Like, you're going to have to force the ball out of his hands, or he's going to force himself, if that's what it calls for, to get a shot at the rim or whatever it is. Like, those kinds of players are very hard to find. And those are the kinds of players that help pace your team during the regular season, or they can help pace your team in the playoffs when you have stretches where it's just, you can't get anything going. You just watched the playoff recently, like when the Warriors turned off Jaylen Brown's ability to get to the rim, and he was turning the ball over left and right and stuff like that, or when they were sending 2 guys to wall, Draymond and Gary Payton II or whatever, like, things got very shaky offensively for Boston. Getting to the rim matters a lot in the playoffs. And Russ, for all his struggles, he's still really good at getting to the rim. He's always been really, really good at getting to the rim. Everything that happens during that process is really what the concern is, whether he can make the shot, the layup, make the right kick-out pass without turning over. His playmaking is still there. But again, it's harnessing those sort of things into the right direction. And that matters. That matters a lot. And I think, again, same way with talking to Anthony Davis, same way being cerebral with LeBron James. Like, talking to Russ and acknowledging that we know that you play with this ferocity and this energy, and we want you to play with it, but we just want you to focus it in this direction, or focus it in this manner a little bit more. And we'll make sure that we put people in position to reward that effort. That stuff matters. That's sharing the workload. And it's just the way he describes those 3 conversations going separately, the way that they did, with different emphasis, based on how the player is, that gives me cause for optimism, because I think that kind of stuff matters. And I think a role player understands that. A guy who's been in the trenches understands that you have to be able to talk to players in a different manner to get their buy-in. And then this is not to say that AD, Russ, and LeBron are on completely separate pages. This is just, it's like a one-on-one thing. And I think it's really great that Coach Ham has been able to do that. You know, the other thing that he also says is that in talking to Russ and asking him to redirect some of that energy on the defensive end, like he mentions in passing that Russ and him agreed that and Russ himself gave himself goals defensively that he wants to reach this upcoming season. I don't know what that means. Is it a statistic that he's being measured by? Is it something to do with his containment or just off-ball stuff? Who knows? Does it mean that Russ is going to fix everything? You know, he's been in the league for 14 years. Some habits die very hard or don't die at all. You know, and there's that saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks or something like that is what the saying is. Like, so I'm sure there's going to be mistakes. There's going to be games where AD probably doesn't shoot well, or LeBron's tired, or Russ falls asleep on defense and stuff like that. But the fact that dialogue is open and you know, Rich asked him, like, how did Russ respond to stuff like, you know, what Darvin Ham said. And Darvin Ham said, Coach Ham specifically said that him and Russ, like, instantly, you know, like, connected because they're both very straightforward guys. And he says that, you know, like, I don't mess around, or Ham says he's a straight shooter. So, like, Russ responded to that, being very straightforward about what was going on and stuff like that. So I'm optimistic. I think Russ has the physical tools to be successful. It's a lot of his stuff has always been, is he going to put in the effort defensively? Is he going to play with discipline on the offensive end? Will he be smart about what he goes about doing? And so you know, it'll be interesting if Russ is on this roster to see how it goes. But at least the conversation gives me a lot of optimism. And then the last thing that he says in this interview that he talks about is, Coach Ham has been around the league a lot, and what's really cool in this specific, at the end of this interview, is he talks about tapping into all these different people. And the reason this response comes is because Rich Eisen is asked if he has the authority to hire the assistant coaches that he wants, and he has the authority to, you know, like, just do stuff that you would expect a coach to be allowed to do, you know, with their own authority. And Coach Ham says he does. Like, he is allowed to, you know, he is going to pick his own assistant coaches and structure things the way that he wants to structure it. And what I thought was really cool is that Coach Ham specifically said that he reached out to Quinn Snyder, that he reached out to Mike, you know, obviously he talked to Mike Budenholzer. He talked to Taylor Jenkins over in Memphis, the head coach for Memphis, and he asked them what were the things that they looked for in assistant coaches and when it came to building out their staff. And I think that's awesome. He talks about leveraging knowledge from guys like George Karl, from Larry Brown, from different head coaches, Greg Popovich, like coaches that have been successful when it comes to developing his coaching staff and stuff like that. And I think that's really awesome. I think it's really good that he's able, like, Taylor Jenkins has been successful for Memphis. Mike Budenholzer, both in Atlanta and then also with Milwaukee, has been successful. Quinn Snyder going from that assistant coach role to the role with the Jazz, like, Utah was a great, like, regular season team. Like, they've fallen short. I would say that they've probably fallen short because of their personnel and not so much because of the coach. But, like, again, these things, like, a coach that's willing to go out there and leverage the minds, leverage the knowledge, and has good relationships with people outside of the Lakers organization where they can leverage this sort of stuff is a big deal, because that's plagued the Lakers for such a long time. Like, keeping everything internal and only using Lakers, people who have Laker ties, stuff like that, like, that stuff has been, you know, it's been really restricting. And so, you know, overall, I think everything that I saw from the interview and just kind of his responses and the stuff that I've been hearing, it gives me a lot of optimism about this upcoming season. I think a big part, even outside of what the coach is saying, is going to be the roster construction. And I think everybody's been talking about Russ and who you get in return for Russ if you do trade him or if you don't trade him, or what machinations you have to, you know, be able to make the team better. The roster is going to be really important outside of Russ. Even if you trade Russ for whatever your dream trade is, like, there's still going to be like 7, 8 other roster spots that need to be filled on this team. Each one is going to matter because we need to make sure that we keep our stars healthy. So I don't want to get it. I don't want to say that like a new coach is going to solve everything. It's clearly not. Players still have to play. Coaches have to coach. But I think having a coach who has this sort of mindset and this sort of philosophy and can get this sort of buy-in from their star players and be able to communicate in different manners with their star players, I think that's a big deal. And I'm going to look forward to seeing how he fills out the rest of the roster. We've already seen the rumor that Chris Gent, actually at the time of recording this, I just saw it just passed across my tweet deck that we hired Coach Gent to be our assistant coach next to Darvin Ham. So, congratulations to Chris Gent. Rasheed Wallace has also been mentioned as a potential assistant coach on the roster. I'm going to look forward to seeing how he builds this roster out, and then what the on the coaching staff, how he builds his coaching staff out, and then how he builds the roster out, and in sort of what this front office does, and if they really fully commit to Darvin Ham's vision, and then I hope they do, because I think Coach Ham's approach is very refreshing, and I really appreciate a coach that I really enjoyed Vogel being a very diplomatic coach, and I think that's a quality that a lot of people in general just don't have in life. And I think Vogel was a very diplomatic coach, pretty much right down to the end. The only thing I think is that there was a point where diplomacy wasn't necessary, and we just had to focus on basketball. And I get it. It is very, very tough because of LA media and because of how many people in LA media are trying to get that viral soundbite or that viral response. Like, that was the thing with Russ. Like, people would ask Russ stupid questions, and fans would get mad that Russ was combative, but people would ask questions that, like, they should know the answer to. And the whole purpose of it, and he was being recorded for all of this, the whole purpose was to go viral. Like, I'm sure lots of LA media is absolutely excited if Russ comes back, because they know that they're going to hit their engagement goals on their social media accounts very, very easily. But that's neither here nor there. But I think Coach Ham's response, him being a blue-collar player and having to go through all these sort of things, I think it's already making a difference with the guys that we currently have on this roster. So I'm looking forward to everything that happens from here on out up until the season starts. But again, it's hard for me to not be optimistic, because the stuff that he's talking about is basketball. He's not talking about like in theory stuff. He's talking about stuff like it just has to happen. Going to Russ and saying, I need you to be a pit bull on defense, like that has to happen if Russ is going to be on this roster. That's just basketball. Like telling Russ that we know that you have, unlimited energy at times. We need you to focus it in the right place. Like, we don't need you to go, there's more value to you getting us a stop on the defensive end because you didn't get buried on a screen, and instead of you giving up that layup or giving up that jumper and then trying to score on the other end. Like, that kind of stuff matters. That's basketball. And him doing it with LeBron, him doing it with AD, stuff like that, and just kind of going in that direction. I think it's as a Laker fan, like, I think there's a lot of optimism. I think that's something to be very optimistic about. And so I'm looking forward to just kind of seeing how everything goes moving forward. But, as always, I appreciate you guys taking the time to watch the video. Hopefully this stuff has been beneficial. As always, if you can like and subscribe, I appreciate it. It helps the channel out a lot. And if nothing else, I'll see you guys in the next video. See you later.